Terraria 1.4.5 is a fantastic update, but it did come with a surprising amount of controversial changes to the game. So today we're going to be talking about the most controversial changes in Terraria 1.4.5, what they are, and whether or not those changes are good for the game. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe as it really helps me out, and let's get into it. Number 1. NPC portraits. Whenever you talk to an NPC, you will now see their own unique portrait show up next to their dialogue. Despite being such a small and simple change, a lot of players really don't like it, and even when it got announced, a lot of people were complaining about it. To be honest, I think that some of these portraits look really good, but I do think that some of them also look really odd. The Angler has a very bizarre portrait, and I know he's a kid, but I just didn't imagine him looking like that. The Guide looks very strange, and I don't think I can really describe it, but I think everybody knows what I mean. The Dye Trader has a weird portrait, and so does the Party Girl, and so do multiple other NPCs. On the other hand, there are a few of these portraits that I think really match their character. The Merchant has an absolutely amazing portrait, and so does the Clothier, and so does the Cyborg, and so does the Golfer. There's a very mixed bag, where some NPC portraits look exactly like the NPC would look, and others just don't. The thing with every NPC portrait, regardless of quality, is that they don't really fit the game, at least according to a lot of players. You could say that objectively, these are all amazing pieces of pixel art. Even the ones that look a little bit strange are still really good looking on their own. What people seem to not like is that the style of these portraits doesn't really fit Terraria. As dumb as it sounds, I think a lot of people would be more receptive to the NPC portraits if they were lower quality. I've seen a lot of people compare it to Stardew Valley, and while I don't think it's the exact same thing, I think that it is a fair comparison. The art style of the NPC portraits in Terraria looks a lot more like the characters in Stardew Valley than anything else you really see in Terraria. Overall, it's very fair to not love this feature, but it's also a purely visual thing that people are gonna get used to in time, and so overall, I would still say it's a good change to the game. Number 2. No whip stacking. Whip stacking is an incredibly iconic mechanic in Terraria, but for anybody who doesn't know what it is yet, I'll explain it very briefly. A lot of whips in Terraria have different passive effects that they inflict on every single enemy that they hit. Stuff like burning or freezing that can actually deal decent damage to enemies over time. Different whip effects did not always cancel themselves out though, so if you used multiple different whips interchangeably, you would be able to get multiple passive damage effects on enemies at the same time. This is whip stacking, and it used to be essential to the character of Terraria's summoner class. A huge change that has been made in Terraria 1.4.5, however, is that whip stacking has been completely removed. In the update logs, it says, quote unquote, different whip tags can no longer stack with one another. Hitting an enemy with a whip now clears the effect of any other whip that is active. This means that now you are much better off going with one or maybe two whips at a time when dealing with enemies instead of switching between multiple to get more damage. I think it's important to explain why whip stacking was removed from the game because I think it's very obvious but very important. Terraria 1.4.5 adds nearly 10 new whips to the game. If any class got a buff in this update, it was absolutely Summoner, and there is really no debate around that. Now, if they kept whip stacking in the game while adding 9 entirely new whips with different effects spread all throughout the game, then obviously Summoner would become even more powerful than it already was. Considering Summoner was already a very powerful and underrated class in 1.4.4, I can see why the Terraria developers thought that getting rid of whip stacking would at least balance it out a little bit. It's very understandable why they would think to get rid of whip stacking as a mechanic, but I'm going to say one thing very clearly. Summoner being overpowered wouldn't be that bad. Summoner is by far the most skillful class in Terraria, and I'm not saying that because it's my favorite, because it's not, but it definitely takes the most skill to utilize summoner weapons in Terraria. With Melee, Ranger, and Mage, you really just stick back and send out projectiles later into the game, while with Summoner, you always have to stay close to the enemy because whips never really have great range. I think that whip stacking as a mechanic really fit the fundamental gameplay of the Summoner class, which is that it wasn't very easy, but if you took advantage of it, you could do very well. Switching between multiple whips while being close to an enemy and having low defense simply requires more skill than a class like Ranger, and so I think there should be a bigger reward. Even if that reward is Summoner being the highest DPS class in Terraria, I think that that's totally fine. Melee is way too dominant right now in terms of power. Ranger, Mage, and Summoner really aren't even close, and it would be cool for the Melee class to have a competitor. I think that whip stacking was a really cool mechanic that made Summoner unique and special. It was personally the only thing that really made me love using the class at all, and now that it's completely gone, I'm probably not gonna love Summoner as much, despite the new weapons. This is definitely my least favorite change in Terraria 1.4.5, and overall, I think it's pretty bad. Number 3, the crafting rework. I'm sure a lot of players who play Terraria 1.4.5 think it's ridiculous to even bring this up, but it is true. I've seen a lot of people who do not like the new crafting system in Terraria. I'll explain why I think people don't like this new change in a second, but before that, I just want to point out all of the benefits of Terraria's new crafting system. The modernized journey mode graphics are more appealing, especially for new players who aren't gonna like Terraria's old school UI. Searching for items with a search bar is extremely useful, and that should have honestly been added to Terraria years ago. You can now craft with specific stations, which is a very underrated but great feature. For example, if you had gold ore in your inventory and you wanted gold bars, but your inventory was very cluttered, you could just right-click on a furnace and the gold bars would be right there, easy to see. You can now craft from all nearby chests, so you don't have to actually go and individually take stuff out of every single chest if you want to craft something, because it'll just be available in your crafting menu. Those are all of the benefits of the new crafting system in Terraria, and I think that they more than make up for any quote-unquote problems that the system has. I don't usually like to say this, but I think this is a very clear case of people just having a lot of nostalgia. The new crafting system has more features, it looks cleaner, and it's much easier to get used to than Terraria's old and somewhat dated crafting system. With NPC portraits, I do understand why some people think it doesn't fit Terraria, but the new crafting certainly does. When I see certain people say that the new crafting system is trash, it kind of reminds me of those gaming isn't fun anymore, or Minecraft isn't the same type videos. Yes, the crafting system is very different now than it was 10 years ago in 1.2 when you were playing Terraria, because it's much better. It's new, it's modern, and it's improved. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure you can just switch the crafting back to the old system as well if you really want to, so there's really no harm, no foul. I don't see any valid reason to not like Terraria's new crafting, and I think it is a great change overall. Apparently, I was actually completely wrong about this, and there is literally no toggle in the game that you can use to go back to the old crafting in Terraria. This is kind of ridiculous, and I think it's a huge oversight by the developers. I think the new crafting is fantastic, and of course, I think that most players will probably stick with it even if they do add a toggle, but there needs to be some way for veteran players to stick with what they're used to. Relogic, this new crafting is a good addition, but please add a toggle. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Terraria 1.4.5's 3 most controversial changes. Make sure to leave your thoughts on the update in the comments section, and as always, please join the Discord server if you want to talk about Terraria or you like my content. Alright, bye-bye.